Hello friends, welcome to the second day of DotVVM Virtual Conference 2021. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I hope that you enjoyed the stream we had yesterday. So if you are new to DotVVM, check out the beginning of our yesterday's stream, because I was explaining what is DotVVM, how you can use it to build new web apps, and how you can use it to modernize old ASP.NET Web Forms applications and getting them to the latest versions of .NET. So what's on our agenda for today? So first, I will be showing a short demo of how you can use Fluent UI web components with DotVVM. Fluent UI is a Microsoft's framework. It's a design framework, and you know all those UI elements and buttons and styles from Microsoft applications like Office 365 and Azure Portal and many more. So you will see how to use the same components, same looking components in your DotVVM applications. Then we have two sessions from our developer advocates. First is .vvm in action on ml.net from Daniel Gomez. And also we have a session about CI/CD pipelines using GitHub Actions from our advocate Vincent Noach. And finally, I will close this conference with a short session about what are plans for .vvm 4 and what features you can look forward to in our next release. And I will be showing some demos because some of the things already work. So let's jump into the first session about web components. So what is web component? Basically, it's not a single standard. It's basically a combination of features introduced in the HTML specification, which allows library and component authors to create universal component that can be used from any framework. Basically, it's the main features which allow this are these two. First is a JavaScript API, which allows you to define custom HTML elements. So you can define, like the Fluent UI team has defined, the Fluent select element, and this element is not transpiled to anything else, like if you use .vvm components or something like that, but this is just sent to the browser, and because of this script that is imported in the page header, the browser will know how to react to this control, to this HTML element. Yeah, so it will know that if it finds the Fluent select element, it has to do something like this. Yeah, so the first part of this standard is an API which allows to define custom HTML elements and how these elements should behave. And the second piece of this puzzle is a shadow DOM, document object model, and basically it allows the browser to or the component to specify how this element should look like. Yeah, so in the HTML page there will be the Fluent select element, yeah, like in this example, but what is being rendered will be some divs with some CSS classes and other hierarchy inside, and that's called shadow DOM because it's not in the real DOM of the page, but it is what the browser will be rendering. Yeah, so these two features allows a lot of people to create their own elements and define how they will be rendered. And this is great for all component authors because they can create components universally for any framework, and they don't need to care about if people are using React or Angular or .vvm or any other web technology, because this is just a feature of HTML and it's supported in all major browsers today. So how does this look? Actually, I have two projects, so I need to go to the correct Visual Studio. Okay, this should be it. Okay, so I have a sample application, and to demonstrate the foundations, I have a plain page which basically it's using .vvm, but it's not using anything else than master pages. So basically I have a plain DOT HTML page which includes this script type module in the header, you can see it's a Fluent UI package, web components. It's going from a CDN, so it's even not downloaded in my project, which is a little bit dangerous because if they change the version, this will always give you the latest version, so they can be breaking changes. But you can see this element, which is defined by the Fluent UI scripts. So this element will tell the browser to do something. We will see it in a minute. Basically, it includes some CSS styles required by the Fluent UI components. And then, as you can see, I'm just using plain HTML elements. This will work in any framework because it's just HTML. The framework doesn't touch these elements. DotVVM isn't aware about this element. For DotVVM, it's just a regular HTML element, so it will just be passed through to the browser. Yeah? So this is Fluent text field, and it's basically a text box control which ships with basic styles and some features you might expect. There is also Fluent checkbox, which is nice styled checkbox. You can see that I'm setting checked to true. Yeah, so you can interact with these controls using HTML attributes, and it will work. This is the Fluent select. It's what you already saw in the slides. Yeah, so it's a select drop-down list where you can pick one of these options, and there are two buttons. First has the appearance equal to accent. There are defined, the Fluent UI defines several appearances for the components, so you can choose which one you want. So this accent will be emphasized with accent color, which is parameterizable, so you can specify your own. There's some default one, and this will be just neutral button. Yeah, so this is it's basically, if you have been using Bootstrap, this is similar, like the primary button in Bootstrap. Yeah, but they call this accent. Yeah. So this is a very simple page, and if I open it, you can see it looks like this. I have zoomed the page in, so you don't need to worry. The components are not so large by default. And you can recognize these styles because if you look in the Azure portal, the controls look very similar or practically the same. Yeah, so this is text box. You can see it's highlighted when it gets focus. This is the select. It supports disabled elements, so this second option is disabled. So you can see it changed my cursor, and it's in gray. And this is nice style checkbox. It's looking better than the default one. Yeah, so these are basic components with some styles. And if you look in the web in the DevTools console, you will see that it looks a little bit weird, but for example, here we have the Fluent text field. Yeah, so this is this text box control. Yeah, and you can see that I can close this. So you can see that in the HTML tree, this is just Fluent text field. So the element really lives in the page, but there is some shadow root, which is the shadow DOM I have been talking about, and this is what the browser will actually render. Yeah? So it will render a label, it will render some div with some styles, and the text box is composed from these elements. But if you would try to for example, enumerate the elements using JavaScript, you won't see them because these are not part of the real DOM. These are part of the shadow DOM. So this is what the browser is rendering, but it's not in the object tree of the page, in the default, in the root object tree in the page. Yeah, so this is pretty nice. And you can change these attributes. So for example, if I change the appearance to something else, the control would change its style. And for example, we have this Fluent Design System provider, which ships some default CSS styles in the page. And it also can be set with some parameters. So for example, I can add an attribute like accent color, accent base color. I hope the name is correct because there's no IntelliSense, unfortunately. So if I would like to change the accent color, I can do it like this. Yeah, so you set the attribute on this Fluent Design System provider, and all controls inside will inherit this style. And what you can also do is you can to change the back color, and it's even more interesting because, for example, if I set background color equals to 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 6 zeros, so this will make the background black. And the controls are quite powerful and intelligent, because if they detect they are on the dark background, they will change and recalculate the other colors. Yeah, so if I change the background color, you can see that now the texts are black. So when I change this, the texts turned to white, because the styles inside the controls are intelligent, and based on the background color, they can adapt so the texts are still visible. And of course, you can override these colors to some other colors you like, but if you just want to enable a dark mode in your application, it's in default, it's as easy as to set the background color to 0, and most of the controls will just recalculate their colors, so it will still look pretty nice. Yeah, so of course it's this application, it would be nicer if this Fluent Design System provider would include also the menu and things like that, because this looks quite weird, but still it's quite nice that you can change these things. And you can change it, as you can see, you can change it without reloading the page. So if I fix this, yeah, now I'm still back in the light mode. Yeah, so this is what the controls can do, and it's pretty impressive. And because they are natural HTML elements, any framework can interact with them. So these controls are based on a framework which is also developed by Microsoft. It's called FAST, and it allows you to build any web components using TypeScript. They have a lot of syntax helpers, because the native JavaScript API for defining the web components is not very, it's very low level. So this framework gives a better abstraction on this, and it's quite easy to define components. You can look at the GitHub of Fluent UI team how they do it, but it looks very easy to do, and it's nicely maintainable. So basically anyone can build these web components either using the pure API or using frameworks like FAST, and it will work in every framework that can manipulate with HTML DOM elements, because the Fluent text field is just an HTML element, and even DotVVM can work with these elements. It can hide them using visible property, it can bind values from the view model to HTML attributes, and a lot of other things. So it's pretty powerful, and it can be used from .vvm. So if you are interested in how the Fluent UI controls are implemented, you can go to the GitHub of Fluent UI. You need to go to the web components package. It's not in the root, because the Fluent UI has multiple implementations for each platform, and the web components version is currently in progress. Not all components that are supported by Fluent UI are actually ported to web components, but the team is working on it, so it's getting better and better. Yeah? And if you go to SRC, you can see all the components which are there. And if you look in, for example, this index.ts, you can see how these components are implemented. So basically, it's some class with some annotations which tell the framework, okay, this will be the name of the element, and you can see all these properties which are here, some definition of styles. And here in the fixtures, they have the usage of these controls. So you can see how the controls can be used in the pure HTML. Currently, there is no documentation, but I guess they are working on it. But from these fixtures and from the source code, you can see what the components actually support. So this is not perfect. It's still in progress, but it was very easy to start working with that. And if you don't like to create your own styles, this is a nice package which ships with nice looking styles. Okay, so how to use it in .vvm? Basically, DotVVM can do a lot of things with custom elements. So you can use the data binding. For example, if you want to bind a text on a button, you can just use value binding. It will just work. Yeah? And we have the universal click event handler, which you can use on the buttons. So it won't be just click equals something. You will need to use events.click, but it basically renders on click equals some JavaScript, which is fine for even for the Fluent button. What's a little bit more complicated is a two-way data binding, because the controls, when you change their attributes, these changes are propagated into the control, and control will respond to them. So you have seen that I added the background color attribute on the Fluent design system provider, and the component detected the change and changed the styles. Yeah, but when the control itself changes its attribute, by default, nobody is notified about this change. And of course, DotVVM relies on these notifications. So for example, if you want to bind to text box, you will need a custom binding handler that will be able to detect that the text value was actually changed. Yeah? And that's what you don't need to implement, because we have implemented it for you, and it's part of the sample application, so you can use it freely in your apps. And we basically had to write our own replacement of this value binding, which will provide also the way back. Yeah? So let's look how it works. So I have a second page, and let's open it in the browser. So you can see this is the progress bar control. So you can use the standard binding to the value of progress bar, because the progress bar itself cannot change its values. It just reads the value and displays something, but the user has no way to interact with the browser. Yeah, you can curse that this operation is taking a long time, but that's the only, you cannot still change the value of the progress bar directly. Yeah? But this is the numeric up down, where the user can change the values. So here for this second control, we need to be able to observe changes and to write them back to the view model. And if we write them back to the view model, the other controls will just respond to that, thanks to the default value binding, which is in Knockout. So let's look at the source code. You can see that for the progress control, I have used the normal value binding. And for the number field, I had to use this fast.bind dash value equals and then value binding. And this prefix, yeah, this is the same. This value is the same as this, because it's the name of the attribute of the Fluent number field. It has the value attribute. And this is just an attached property group, which will take this value binding, and it won't render the standard attr binding from Knockout.js. It will replace it with our own binding handler. If you are interested how it works, we have basically implemented the bind event handler. So we have the fast bind binding handler, and we are using the observable class from the Microsoft Fast framework. Yeah, because the Fluent UI web components are written on top of this Fast framework. So we are getting the observable get notifier for elements, and this notifier will tell us, okay, this property has been changed. Yeah, and basically when we find that this property has been changed, we just subscribe to it and write the new value in the expression in the value binding. Yeah, so that's what we will do. So instead of a value equals binding, you need to write fast.bind dash value equals binding, and the second way will just work. Yeah, so this is what you need to do. But as you can see, it works, because when I'm changing the value here, the progress bar is actually rising. Yeah. Similarly, I can use the fast bind to the checked property of the checkbox, and then use the visible binding as normally as you are used to. So I can do this. Yeah, because also this two-way binding allows to detect the change in the control and write it back in the view model. Yeah. And this is just button. Yeah, you can see the first button has the accent appearance, the second button is neutral, that's why the first one is blue, the second one is just gray. And you can see that I'm just using events.click, which you can use on any HTML element, including this Fluent button, and it will just work. Yeah. So this is also nice. And what about binding collections? In Fluent UI, there are many controls that expect a collection of elements. For example, we have seen the select. So if you want to create a select, you need to build these elements for each item of this control, of this drop-down list. So, and we have also a way how to do it in .vvm, and it's called repeater. Yeah? So we can create, instead of the Fluent select, we can render a repeater, and we will need to tell it, okay, wrapper tag name is Fluent select. This means that .vvm will render the Fluent select element, and the item template, which is this, will be just placed inside this wrapper tag. Yeah, so it will render the same thing as we have here on the top. The only problem is that you need to render it on the server. So you need to set render settings mode equals server. Otherwise, the elements would appear in the Fluent select too late. So the Fluent, because the page would be loaded and there will be just this template element. And after Knockout.js is initialized, then this will be expanded to the individual options. But it's too late for Fluent UI. So right now you need to use the render settings mode equals server. So .vvm will render this collection on the server, and this will work. There can be some issues if you change these items later. If you want, for example, on a postback, if you want to change these items, you will also need to include postback.update equals true. So the control will be re-rendered on every postback. This will help you if you want to change the items dynamically in the control. However, we have found an issue that while the controls are being replaced, this selected value property is being reset. So you also need to store this selected value somewhere, because once the options disappear, this property will be reset. So that's what we think that we will need to implement some other special kind of binding, like we have fast bind. So we will also have to have something like fast for each or fast collection, where we could do this more cleverly, not just using repeater, but still it works. So if the list in the control is static and doesn't change on postbacks, then it's pretty safe to use it. And you can see these controls are bound to the same property, so it's synchronized. Yeah, the first is just hard-coded items, and the second is created by a repeater, and both of the controls actually work. So this is pretty nice. Yeah. And also I'm binding to the value, and I'm using the two-way binding, so whenever the user changes the value, it will be written back to the view model. Yeah, so this is nice. I needed to create my own Fluent UI bundle, because in my binding handler I'm importing the observable class from the fast framework. So basically I created a very simple pipeline for a rollup that basically just sorry, now this is the generated script. Basically it imports Fluent UI components, adds my binding handler to the package, initializes it, and exports the Fluent UI components back. So I'm just extending this library, and it works pretty well. So this is how you can use these components, and they have quite a lot of controls. So I recommend to explore this repo, and there are new controls being added every few days, so it's very nice. And I hope that they will soon cover all the controls supported by Fluent UI, because right now some controls are missing. For example, there is still no date time picker here, but they have the React version of Fluent UI components, and it contains the date picker. So I expect that it's only a matter of time until they take this date picker and use it here in the Fluent UI package. So this is the current status. Current version is 0.22, so you can see it's still work in progress. I think that for any real production use, we will have to wait until the version 1. And there are actually, or I haven't found any documentation if there is. So I'm sorry, but I haven't found it. But the source code is pretty nice and it's nicely readable. There are the fixtures which show the usage of the controls. So it's good enough at least to start to try the package. And of course there are some controls missing. There is a grid, for example, but it doesn't have all the features, but they're still working on it. And if you look in the pull requests on the repo, there's a lot of work in progress, so it's getting better. I think it's a good thing to watch this library because it looks very promising, and I personally really like that it's universal. It will work with every web framework because otherwise it's kind of problematic for .vvm because we have, for example, the React bridge, so there is a possibility to use React controls in our app, but because you are combining two frameworks, there is some performance overhead. You need to load more scripts, and so this is always a better option. Okay, the only problem with the Fluent UI web components or web components in general is that it's difficult for IDEs to get enough metadata to give you a reasonable IntelliSense. Yeah, so for example, if you use the Fluent progress element, there needs to be something that will tell Visual Studio, okay, this element supports these attributes, and these attributes have the following limitations, like the min value of the Fluent progress can only be a number. Yeah, the code in the Fluent UI is annotated, so I think that there will be a way to provide this metadata, but right now I haven't seen any way how you can actually get IntelliSense for it. It's technically possible, and I believe that in the future it will be available, but right now it's not. And of course there are some required attributes. For example, using the progress bar without specifying the value doesn't make much sense, and the control probably wouldn't work well. So also you need or you want a validation like that. And of course I have shown how to use this in .vvm, but it's also not very convenient. You don't want to use repeater for every select control, so we are looking for providing some wrappers over Fluent UI that will be natural to use. For example, you have .vvm has a type system for control wrappers, and it can do validation of attributes. So if we build wrappers in .vvm, then you will get a nice IntelliSense with all the validations. So for example, the batch control will tell you that you need to specify the text, that the text is required property. We can do this with .vvm, so it's only a matter of writing good wrappers over the controls. We can also validate control usage in the hierarchy of elements. For example, if you use accordion control, .vvm can restrict the inner elements to be just the accordion items and nothing else. Yeah. Also, this is what .vvm is capable of. Or for example, we can add the data source and item template properties. So if you want to use accordion control, but you don't have the static accordion items, you want to generate them from some collection in the view model, this will be possible thanks to the wrappers. So we are looking into creating wrappers over Fluent UI. It will still take some time because there are some controls that are missing, and we think that without, for example, datetime picker, it doesn't much make a lot of sense to use it in apps because this is a crucial control for us. But I think that in a few months this will be available, so we are looking into a way how to provide wrappers. And we have already started doing an experiment for some control wrappers. So and I will be showing it because it's also related to .vvm 4, so I will be showing it on the at the end of the conference. But this is how it will look like. Don't matter the IntelliSense because it's work in progress. But the Fluent tabs control, it will be able to make sure that this property is also set. and also inside this control you will be able to use just this controls and nothing else. Yeah, so that's what we are looking, this is the kind of experience we want to provide. And also, if the tabs are bound from a data source, you will have another option what you can do, and it will be just using the data source. So you will be able to say data source equals tabs collection, and you will probably be able to say something like item header text binding equals, and you will be able to provide a binding to bind this header text. So for example, each object in the collection will have the title. Yeah, so this will be put here, and we will just say item template, and this can be just the inner content of this tab. So you can, of course, and you will probably be binding values or using other controls like here. So this could be a second usage of this control, and I think it really fits the way how .vvm works in the control with the controls. I can see a lot of similarities with Bootstrap, which are also doing these kind of things, and in .vvm we have similar wrappers. So if the Fluent UI web components package is getting more popular, you can expect that .vvm will offer wrappers over these controls too. So that's what I wanted to share about the Fluent UI web components, and after a break you will see Daniel's session about ML.NET and .vvm. So stay tuned.
Hey, hello, hola, ahoy everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you here at DotVVM Virtual Conference. I'm Daniel Gomez, developer advocate at DotVVM from the Latin America region. And on this special occasion, I come to present the DotVVM in Action segment to learn about how to work with machine learning projects with DotVVM in ML.NET. So we can get started. In this session, we will start talking about ecosystems ML.NET for the creation of projects with ML.NET and then learn how to create machine learning projects in DotVVM. With this overview, we are going to see two demos of machine learning projects with DotVVM and ML.NET. Finally, as extra bonus, we will learn how to deploy our projects with DotVVM in Azure. In short, we will talking about artificial intelligence, the development of modern web applications with DotVVM, and also about cloud computing. With that said, let's get started. Okay, .NET is an application development framework created by Microsoft. It allows you to make applications of all of kinds. The innovation behind .NET is to integrate all Microsoft development tools, libraries, languages, technologies, proposals into the same framework, which is able to get where the developer or the company needs. In .NET, we can create applications, whether desktop, web, cloud solutions, mobile applications too, video games, Internet of Things, and also artificial intelligence solutions. In this case, we will talk about web projects focused on artificial intelligence solutions. For artificial intelligence projects in .NET, we can find ML.NET. This is a framework that allows you to work with machine learning projects with different possible scenarios and take the advantage of all of power of .NET to integrate them into other projects such as .VVM. So in .NET, .NET is an open source ecosystem, so ML.NET is open source too. ML.NET can run anywhere, either on-premises environments, that is in private cloud, for example, or also in public clouds such as Azure, on any operating systems. We can find multiple of scenarios to apply ML.NET solutions. For example, if we consider some topics or areas, for example, for classification solutions, we can do sentiments analysis, categorizing emails as spam or not spam, classify low documents. This is an example. For example, in the other hand, we can find regressions field, for example, to price prediction, predict sales of product based on advancing basket. In other case, for example, forecastings to predict the future sales based on past sales, predictive maintenance, and weather forecasting, for example. In other way, we can find, for example, anomalous detections to identify potentially fraudulent transactions, detecting network instructions, and also ranking to search results. In other hand, for example, clustering for customer segmentations, and also recommendations, for example, to recommend products to our clients in our websites, for example. This is a few things we can do with ML.NET. Now, how to work with machine learning in ML.NET? As a first thing we need to do is prepare our data through a dataset, for then build and train our model to generate that. Finally, we can run our model to prove it in a real scenarios. In this way, as a first case, we need to create our model in ml.net, and then we can have the model consummation, for example with .vvm, creating a web page to consume our model. In ml.net we can have or find 3 ways to use ml.net. For example, in first point, we can use ml.net API to generate a service and consume our model. In another way, in a second way, we can find ml.net. This is the most easy way, because here we can have a model builder in Visual Studio with user interface to create our model. And in the other hand, we can also find the ml.net in the CLI command line interface to generate out models and then consume this model. So in this case, with .vvm web applications on ml.net, we can use, for example, in a first instance, ml.net model builder into Visual Studio to create our model, and then consume this model with .vvm solution to represent, the data and all of this. And this is that we can do now. This is time to demo section. In this case, we have 2 demos to present here at .vvm virtual conference to see how to work ml.net with .vvm. So here we go. Okay, here in Visual Studio, we go to create a new project. In this case, we can go to create a .vvm web application, this type of project. For example, I can write here ml.vvm, project name and solution 2, and create our project. Here we can go to the wizard of .vvm to create, for example, or add some features, for example, scripts or style resources, to specify the .NET version. In this case, we put in this way. Now create our project. The project is here. Previously, to work with ml.net, we need, for example, in this case, let me open the Visual Studio installer. In our Visual Studio, in our version, we need to have the section multi-platform development of .NET in English. We will appear in this way, but we need this workload to work with ml.net, because we need this component, ml.net model builder, to create our model, and only this that is we need. So in this case, in our .vvm project, we need to create the model as well. In this case, to do that, we can go to the principal project and click right, and go to the section add, and go to the machine learning option and add a new item. So in this case, I'm going to write sentiment analysis. Okay. Immediately, we can see the model builder here in Visual Studio. In that, we need to specify an scenario to work or to create our machine learning model. In this case, our first demo is about text classification. For example, to have categories, to have, for example, in our text is a positive way or negative way. So we can select this text classification, Now we can specify our training environment, that is to select our processor, memory to work and train our machine learning model. For example, in other scenarios, we can use, for example, the compute on Azure or other clouds. In this case, this specifically scenario allows you to work in a local computer. Then we need to specify our dataset to create our model. In this case, we have two options. For example, to specify a CSV file or a database on SQL Server. In this case, I have an example on a file text file. Let me show you. In this case, I have this dataset to comments of Amazon products. For example, in this way. Good case, excellent value. For example, 1 is to a positive comment. In other case, for example, what a waste of money and time. This is a negative comment, for example. And this dataset is that. Positive and negative comments, 0 or 1. And we can use that to train our model. When we upload our data on Visual Studio, we can see in this case the data preview. Okay, this is a preview, for example, code 0 and code 1. Code 0 is the text, for example, and code 1 is the 0 or 1 sentiments in this case. And also we need to specify what column we need to predict, what label. In this case, in the future scenarios, we need, for example, to write a text and predict if it's 0 or if 1. In this case, it is about the code 1. And now we can go to the next step. In this way, we can set up our time to train our model. If we can put more time, we can get a best model. So in this case, for example, I'm going to put 120 seconds and start the training. Okay, our training is complete. And for example, in this way, we can see the process of training to create our model. But this is done. And in this case, for example, our next step is to evaluate our model to see that everything is working in a correct way. So we can do that. In this case, for example, we can write our example to prove our model. For example, we can write we love .vvm, for example, and predict our result. Okay, this is a positive comment, one result with 95% of these results. So in this case, we can write another scenario. In this case, for example, to negative, we can write we hate that. This is only an example. That predict. Okay, 0 negative comments with 89% of probabilities. So next we can generate project templates, for example, to consume that the consummation of this module, for example, creating a console app or a web app 2. In this case, this is we don't have to do that. The intention in our case is, for example, to create a web page in .vvm to use this model. So this is all. Next step, and this is all. Because in this case, in our .vvm project, we can find in this section, for example, sentiment analysis, section that code generated to work with our machine learning project. For example, in this case, the most important thing is this class, sentiment analysis, the consummation part. In this case, we need a model input. The model input in this case has a code 0, that is the text, and the result is, for example, the code 1, the predict result, in this case 0 or 1. And also the model output, we also have the prediction, that is 0 or 1, and the score, that is the percent of probabilities of this prediction. The only we need to do is call this method and send the input, the model input, and we can have the model output as a result. And this is that we need to do in this case. For example, in our project, in default, let me show you, we can see the hello world typically on .vvm. So we can edit that to consume our machine learning model, and I'm going to this section. Here we can write some attributes to prepare our model input. For example, public string input text, the text about from the user. Also, other attribute, in this case, to show the result from the prediction process, and also to have the score, the probabilities of our production. Okay, and also we can define a method to call a process to predict the input text. Okay, in our method, predict method, we can define a input model to specify our input text and then predict our input text to generate the output model. In this way, we can define a var called input, that is new sentiment analysis dot model input in this case. And here we can define the call 0 with the input text. Input text. Okay, then we can specify the prediction and assign that to our output bar in this case. For example, output, that is sentiment analysis dot predict, and we need to send, in this case, the input, the model input, and that is, we have the output results in this variable. Now, the only need that we need to do that is to prepare our result. For example, if our output prediction is 0, that is a negative comment. So here we can put the result, this result, to show, for example, in the .vvm web page, put that is negative. Else that the result is positive. Is positive. Okay, the only other thing that we can do is to, sorry, okay. Only thing we need to do is present the probabilities of this prediction. So in this case, for example, we can specify through the score, and for example, show 99.95% of probabilities that is positive. And so in this case, for example, we can use a decimal round and put up the probabilities. Output in this case, the referencing is score, and depending of the result, negative or positive, through the prediction, we can specify here this result. And now we can multiply this for 100, and then put that is only 2 decimals. Okay, now let me cast this at explicit cast. Okay, and point and comma. Okay, that is, in this way we call to our model to have an input text and then predict this text, and also have an output to the result of our prediction, and in this case, for example, prepare the results, negative or positive in this case. Now we can put here and use some .vvm controls to receive the data and process it. Okay, let me delete this, only this. I will write here ml.net on .vvm or with .vvm demo. Here we can put a .vvm control about .textbox, and in this way receive our input data. In this case is text. The value is input text. And we can also put, for example, a placeholder saying write your text. Okay, and also we can put a button down here and with other .vvm control, sorry, button, and here a call to the click event, and in this case I specify a command, and here specified our predict method. Okay, and also here we can show the results of our prediction. In this case, for example, with the value of result and also with our score. Value result and also the value of score. In this way. Sorry. Yeah, in this way. Okay. This is our simple web applications, a little demo. Let me delete this. Okay, and run our project to see our .vvm with ml.net example. Okay, our execution is here, and this is a little example, remember? As a first way, we need to write our text. We can write, for example, we really love .vvm framework, for example. And now predict these comments, and the result is positive with 96% of probabilities that this text is positive, a positive comments with our sentiments text analysis model with .vvm on ml.net. Now we can prove with another scenario. For example, I hate the box. Negative results with 86% of probabilities that this comment is negative. This is a single example or an easy example. Now we can prove with another scenario more complex that this demo. Other scenario that we can do is, for example, to predict or classify images, for example, in our times. See, for example, if one person have or don't have a face mask. For example, this is an other model that we can do, and we can take this opportunity to show this demo too. Okay, here we need to do the same process to create our machine learning model. Here in our principal project with .vvm, we can go to the section Add and add machine learning. In this case, our example is about image classification. Okay, and add. Here we can see again the model builder to create our model. In this case, our scenario is image classification to classify if a person have a mask or don't have. So in this case, the scenario is image classification. We can select that. And now prepare our environment. We can find several cases in this way. For example, use our local CPU, and also use, for example, if we have a graphical target, use, for example, a local GPU environment. For example, we can see the cards here. If we click check compatibility, we need to install some extensions in our Visual Studio. And also in other scenario, we can use, for example, Azure Machine Learning Workspace to process our data, in this case, the image files on Azure. In this case, we can use a local CPU with this, and in our next step, prepare our data set. Previously, we work with text dataset. In this case, is with image files, and in this case for image classifications, we need to have, for example, a sample folder, a father folder, and the childs. This is the labels, for example. In this case, for our case, is with mask or without mask. I have here an example, face mask classification, and the labels is with mask and without mask. We can select that, and in the data preview, we can see the labels. In this case, for example, peoples with mask, and in the other hand, people without mask. This is our data, and now we need to train our machine learning model. We can start training, and this process can take a little time to train the machine learning model. Okay, our training process is done. For example, in this section, we can see the code generated to consume our model. Now, as a next step, we need to evaluate our model to prove or test the precision. In this case, in Visual Studio, we can browse an image to prove our model. I have some pictures here. Okay, for example, this picture. Okay, without mask, 79% of probabilities on these images. One thing we need to take account in this case, that to the train process, we have 10 images for without mask and 10 other images without mask, and with this data set we trained our model. So the results and the model is with a base of these data sets. So we can now try with another image. Let me select, for example, this other one, a picture with a mask. Okay, with a mask, 75%. Let me try with another image too. For example, this other one with a mask. Okay, wow, with a mask, 100% of probabilities on this image. Let me try with another image too. For example, this image without mask. Okay, very nice results without mask, 99% of probabilities, and this is very well for our model. And then this is all from our site, because, for example, in this way we can find the options to generate project templates. Remember, for example, to create a console app or web app too. And in our next steps, we can find the documentation of Microsoft, for example, to deploy our model on Azure and other scenarios too. So in this case, we can go to the code generated, in this case to image classification. In this section, for example, image classification consummation, and here we can find input model 2. In this case, for example, the label is with mask or without mask, and the image source to predict our image. And also we can recognize this section 2, for example, output class. In this we can see the prediction. This is a string with a mask or without a mask, and the score to see the probabilities of this prediction, and also the method of predict to predict and model input in a particular way, and the results too. In the same case, we can generate a web page to send a file and predict this file. In this case, I have prepared this demo for reasons of time. Let me show you. Okay, in this case, the demo project is here. So I'm going to run this project first, and then I'm going to show you the code, in this case the view and the view model to consume our image classification model. Okay, our demo is here. with styles and more beauty to see. For example, this is the other demo to sentiment analysis. In this case, we want to see the image classification process. Okay, in this way, we need to search the image. Okay, I will put that image. Okay, with mask is the result of this prediction with 78% of probabilities, and we can prove other image. For example, this other one, this image with mask. Okay, with mask too, 99% of probabilities that this image is a person with a mask. In another example, this other one, this image without mask, we can try it. Okay, the result is without mask with 81% of probabilities. Okay, this is the face mask classification demo, and now we can go to see the views and views models code. Okay, I have a face mask view model. Let me show you. In this case, the process, as you know, as you see, is, for example, upload a file and when classify and when predict this image. So in this case, we need to specify, for example, I upload file storage to storage our image, and also, for example, other attributes, results to show without mask or with mask, and the score to show the probabilities of the predict. Also, we can see the upload files collections. For what? In this case, to have a face mask view model here and specify upload files collection in our constructor, and also the main method in our particular case about predict method. For why? Upload path, this is, for example, to upload only one image, and have the target path for when this target path specify in a model input on image classification. Then with this sample data, a model input way, we can have our output bar, in this case to predict our sample data. Then, as a same way as a sentiment analysis demo, we can prepare our results. For example, in this case, the result is a string. We can put in a directory way in this sentence output that prediction, and also we can specify the score, the probabilities on this section, and finally clear or refresh the files on our storage. Okay, this is about, for example, in our view model for the face mask, and also we can see the view in the section face mask. Okay, here we can comment two things. For example, to upload the file, we can use the .vvm control called file upload. In that, we can specify some attributes. For example, uploaded files, that is files that to reference to the files. Here we don't allow to have multiple files. In this way, we can specify that. And for example, in this case, to say message test. If the files are uploaded in the correct way, we can show a message predicting. And also, for example, the upload button text and allowed file types. And of course, upload completed, we can call the command predict and predict that image and show the results. The result is shown in this part. In this case, the results content with mask or without mask and the score. Okay, as you can see, work with ML.NET with .vvm is very easy to do, because the only thing we need to do that as a first point is to prepare our dataset, for example, sentiment analysis or image classification, to create our machine learning model, and then we can have the consummation process with .vvm when we're preparing our web application. In this case, this is the demo. And in this way, for example, we can have the sentiment analysis. Remember, we love .vvm and predict this text and have the result. In this case, positive with 99% of probabilities, and also the image classifications too, as we can see earlier. Now, as a plus, we can put this application, for example, for everyone, and in this case, we can use Azure. One thing we need to have in consideration is the resources we need. The resources to have or do a prediction, for example, sentiment analysis, don't require so much resources to predict, because it's only a text. But about the image classification, this is to analyze an image with all our model. So this requires a lot of process. So in this case, I'm going to show you how to deploy web applications like this with .vvm to Azure in a few minutes. So we can do that and go to Azure. In this case, we can use a resource called Azure App Service to deploy our web applications. So I'm going to show you this little example. Here, the only thing we need to do is to create a new app service on this section. Let me do that. Okay, here in Azure App Service, we can, as another resource, specify our Azure subscription and also a resource group to group our resources. In this case, I can put, for example, .vvm virtual conference. Okay. The name, I'm going to write .vvm virtual conference 2. Okay, it's available. And then we need to specify the runtime stack. That is the framework that we are working. In this case is .NET. In our particular case is .NET 5. Now, if you can see, .NET 6 is now available in Azure App Service through early access. But in this case, our project is .NET 5. Now, the operating systems that our applications runs on that, and the regions too. And also our Azure App Service plan, I'm leaving this way, and also review and create our Azure App Service resource. Okay, I'm going to create that. This process takes a little seconds, few seconds. Okay, the process is done, as you can see, and now we can go to the resource. And in this section, the most significantly option is explore our application, for example, .vvm virtual conference.azurewebsites.net. Okay, Here we can find a hello world from Azure App Service, and it's time to take the next step and deploy your code. And that is we can do now. We can go back to our project in Visual Studio, and here in our principal project, ML.vvm project, we can click right and go to the option publish. Okay, we need to sync up with the same account that we used in Azure previously to create our Azure App Service resource. And here we can specify our Azure App Service. In this case, remember, we specify on a Windows machine. Next. We can also create our app service resource here on Visual Studio, but I take this opportunity to show you the process from the Azure portal. Next, we can identify the resource group, in this case .vvm virtual conference, and select our Azure App Service, .vvm virtual conference, finish, and that is the process. Now we can click on publish, and the process begins. Okay, our .vvm application with ml.net is here, as you can see, running from Azure and available for all of use to, for example, in this case, access to our sentiment analysis demo, and also image classification. And that is the way as we can deploy our .vvm applications, in this particular case with ml.net 2, on Azure App Service, as a bonus of this session. Hey, okay, that is for this session. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It's a huge pleasure to be able to participate in this type of spaces to exchange knowledge. In this particular case, to know how to work with machine learning projects with ml.net, and take the opportunity from .vvm to generate our web applications and work with these environments, and also deploy these solutions to Azure through Azure App Service too. So I show you my social networks. If you have any comments, if you need help, or if you need some feedback in your projects, it would be a pleasure to be able to collaborate with you when you want. So thank you very much, everyone, to be here, and have a nice .vvm virtual conference. See you in the next occasion. Thank you. See you.
Okay, hello guys, and welcome to .vvm virtual conference. Very glad to have you here with us today. In this session, this is going to be a workshop, so I want you to join me in doing this workshop. So as the title suggests on screen, we're going to be setting up a CI/CD pipeline for a .vvm web application using AWS Elastic Beanstalk and GitHub Actions. So this is the workshop. I'm doing this. I haven't done a lot of edit here, so you can see the mistakes I made and all of that. And just follow along. So who am I? My name is Vincent Warner. I am a .vvm developer advocate. So what this means is that I put out content there to help you use .vvm better, features in .vvm that you might be missing, and I basically create awareness around the project and the platform. I'm also a Microsoft MVP for development technologies for my contributions to the .NET ecosystem, and I am a software engineer and a software consultant. I mostly work with Microsoft technologies, but I do other technologies and programming languages. Recently, I am finding that I like Golang very much. So for this workshop, what are we going to be doing in this workshop? For this workshop, we're going to create a .vvm application, and then we're going to take that application to the cloud, so to the internet, and we're going to have a URL for it, and we're going to configure CI/CD. So CI means continuous integration, and CD means continuous deployment. So at the end of this session, what we want to have is a .vvm application that we can simply, when we push to our GitHub account with git push master or whatever, git push origin master, we want those latest updates to automatically go to our application running in the cloud. So we run our tests, and if all the steps pass, we update our AWS application with our latest changes. In this kind of setup, you might not want to do this on a production system, but maybe you can set up your dev environment like this, or you can, maybe a personal project or a small website or your blog, you can use this kind of setup for. And you can use the same setup for any ASP.NET application, not just .vvm. So for you to follow along with this project, what are the prerequisites for this project? So first of all, you need a GitHub account, obviously. You need an AWS account. You can create an AWS account, and you can, all of this can be done under the free tier, so you don't have to expend any money on this. You should be able to already create .vvm applications, whether from a Windows or from a Mac. For me, I am working on a Mac here, but if you don't already have .vvm configured on your Linux or Mac environment, I have a Medium article. So I am going to go to google.com, and I'm going to look for .vvm's Medium. So .vvm medium.com, there's an article there that shows you how to set up your environment for .vvm, and that is what I am just going to find. By the way, this is a wonderful place for you to find resources about .vvm. So you see using .NET Core Worker Services, working with WCF. So you can check out these articles on .vvm. Okay, so this is the article I am looking for: setting up for .vvm development on Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. And this is a 5-minute read. So if you want to learn how to set up your environment on Linux or Windows with .vvm, this is an article that will help. It runs you through creating .vvm, installing .NET Core to installing the .vvm templates. So you see installing .vvm templates here. Great. So I'll continue. So I have my environment configured for .vvm already. And then the last thing you need is time and interest. So even if you can't do this now, you can come back to the session later and just run it. Some of the advantages of taking this is, even if you Even if you don't want to use this for .vvm, you're going to learn about AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So in my experience, a lot of .NET developers work with Microsoft Azure, or were deployed to on-premise servers or things like that. But here we're going to be looking at AWS Elastic Beanstalk. AWS Elastic Beanstalk is a really cheap way for you to install your applications, deploy your applications, and it has auto scaling automatically. So whenever your load increases, it just increases for you. And if you have never used GitHub Actions, I know a lot of us are more into the more enterprisey-ish tools, so all those huge deployment tools, but GitHub Action is really lightweight, it's free for a certain tier, and this is something you should look at. So you're going to be learning about GitHub Actions from this session too. So what are the steps we will take to get to our goal? So one of it is we're going to create a GitHub repo. We're going to create an AWS access key. And this access key is to allow us to connect our GitHub repo to AWS. And we're going to add that AWS credential to GitHub. Then we'll create a .vvm application, which will be our sample application. We're going to push that application to GitHub, and we're going to add the GitHub action that is going to build, test, and deploy our application. And then the last thing, we just test it to make sure it works. So this is supposed to be a super short, super straight to the point session. So I'm going to start with the first thing. So create a GitHub action. I already have my github.com/new page here, and I am going to say sample.vvm. I'll change my naming, sample.vvm app. So I am creating the .vvm app here, a sample.vvm application. I'm going to leave this as public. I am not going to add a readme or a gitignore or a license right now. I will just say create repository. So great, I have created the repository that I want to use. The next thing I will do is I will now create an AWS access key. So the next thing we need to do is create an AWS access key. For that, I am already logged into my AWS console. So one of the prerequisites, if you remember, is that you must have an AWS account. So when you go to console.aws.amazon.com, you log in and you go to IAM. So I am going to search for IAM. So IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. I will click on IAM. And I just want to show you how to create an access key if you don't already have one. So I am already on my IAM dashboard. On the right here, you see my access key. So I'll click on my access key. I deleted my access keys for this session, so I'll go ahead and create the new access key. As a matter of fact, I will let you see my access key, but of course I will delete this right after the session. So create access key, I will go ahead and say show access key because I don't want to have to download this and open a CSV and all of that. So these are the access keys I will use for this session. So that satisfies the step, create AWS access key, super easy step. And the next thing for me to do is add AWS credentials to GitHub. And for that to happen, I will come to my repo and say settings. And GitHub has this really cool secrets feature here, so you can add secrets to a repo so you don't have those keys within your source code, and then you can reference those keys from your GitHub actions or from other places in your repository. So I'll come here and say new repository secret, and the name of this secret, I want the name of this secret to be AWS access key ID. So AWS underscore access underscore key underscore ID. And I will take this key that I created here and put it as the value. So I have this key here, say add secrets and new repository secrets. Once again, so for this one, the name I want it to be AWS secret access key. So I'll take the name, paste it here, and I want the value. So again, I'll take this value. And you can download this for safekeeping, because after this, I don't think we'll be able to see this secret. So you should probably download this yourself when you do this. I'm going to paste the key here and say add secrets. That's great. So the next thing I need to do, I'll just close this up. So I have added the secrets to my repo. Let's come back here, create and run .vvm application. You know what, before we create and run this .vvm application, I forgot one critical step. Let's, so this is now going to be for create elastic Beanstalk application in AWS. So basically this is creating the infrastructure in AWS that will hold our application. I'll move it from this step and I will add it after creating the .vvm. Now let's add this after pushing to GitHub, after pushing our application to GitHub. So this is going to be 6. This is going to be 7, and this is going to be 8. Great. So we've added this secret here. Let's see what's the next thing to do. So we need to create a .vvm application locally. The way to do that in Windows, if you're running Windows, you can just fire up Visual Studio and just create a new application and all of that. But if you're on Mac or you're using Linux, you can use the command line and say .NET new .vvm -n. So this n flag gives it a name, and let's see what we named our repo again. I'd like to use the same name, so sample.vvm app. Hopefully I haven't used that. So sample.vvm app, enter. So we've created the application successfully. I'm going to say cd sample.vvm app less. So I can see that I have all of those things here. The first thing I'll do is to add a .gitignore file. So I am not pushing my build and all of that to GitHub. So I'll just go ahead and say touch. So on Mac or Linux, I can just say touch.gitignore. Now I have a .gitignore file. I'll say code and dot to open this up in Visual Studio Code. I have this project opened here. Now I can go ahead and update my gitignore. I already have the gitignore for Visual Studio kind files here. So I'll just copy it and paste it here, and you can get this from any project, any Visual Studio project. You see, it excludes the debug files, debug release, your objects, and all of that. And that is what I am doing here. Just to make sure everything is fine, let's go ahead and try to build this project. So .NET build. This is the sample.vvm application with a sample startup page. Let's just let it build for a second, and 4 warnings, no errors, that's fine. I am not going to check the reason for those warnings right now because that is not the focus. Next I will go and say .NET run, and let's see if we can open this up in a browser. Okay, so my .vvm, so it says this could not run because it was not possible to find any compatible framework version, and I know why I have this issue. If I come to my CS project, so, and if you're on Visual Studio, if you're using Visual Studio, it might not be. So here, it's created this with the .NET Core App 2.0 project. I am simply going to manually update that because I don't have .NET 2.0 here. I'll update that to .NET Core App 3.0, and I will try to run this again. And let's see how it goes this time. Okay, so iLogger Factory. These are some of the differences between .NET Core 2.0 and 3.0. I will just make all of those updates very fast. Really by just stripping them away, because I don't really need these things. I think that resolves that error. So let's try to build this one more time and see. So .NET build. So we can now build against 3.0, and I'll say .NET run. And hopefully this time we will run without issues. Alright, great. We have a HTTPS port. I'll take the URL. I'll just say open URL. And we have hello from .vvm. Awesome. Let's take this to GitHub. For that, I will just say Ctrl C to shut down. I'll clear my console and say git init, just to make this a Git repo. And the first thing I want to do is just add only my git ignore, git add, git ignore, and just make a commit there, git commit initialized repository. That's my commit message, and now I can go grab that URL from my repo. So remember, this is, I created my repo, but I don't have any code here, so I will take the code, the line for adding my remotes, and just paste it here. So add my remotes, push my master branch. I can just type this out. So I have git branch master already on my master branch. Sorry, git branch master, and git push u origin master. Sorry, my typing isn't as good. Master. Great, so I should have my code in my repo now. So, sorry, not my code, I just added just my git ignore. And I think I can add the rest of the files now. Clear my repo, my terminal once again. I can go git status to see what I have here. So I have some unadded files, and I can say git add dot, so add everything that is not ignored, then git commit. I will use added project as my commit message. Git status once again, and git push origin master. Let's refresh this now, and we have our code in our repo. Great, let's see where we are in our steps. So we have created a .vvm application, and we have pushed this application to GitHub. The next thing we need to do is to create an elastic beanstalk application in AWS. And this is a very simple one. All we have to do is come here, and instead of I am going to come here and search for elastic Beanstalk. So I find this name very weird, elastic Beanstalk, but really it's just a, so think of it as an Azure web app, really, that's what it is. I will go ahead and say create application. I don't have any application. So for the application name, I'll call it sample.vvm app. So I'll call it sample.vvm app. And this doesn't have to correspond with your repo name. I just like to do this. So sample.vvm app. If you need any keys, so if you're used to using AWS, you might want keys to associate this to other resources, but I'll just leave all of that blank. The platform I want to use, you can use .NET Core on Linux or .NET on Windows. You can use Elastic Beanstalk to deploy other types of applications. So for now, I'll say .NET Core on Linux, .NET Core running on 64-bit Linux and 2.2.1. I will say yes, deploy the sample application for me. I will not configure. Actually, let's see what more. We have other options we could configure here. So I'm going to leave it to use the single instance, which is sweet here. So this is login. You can increase your VM size. So this runs in the background. This creates a VM. You can configure a load balancer, but these are features, these are settings you would want to use for maybe a production instance or a more involved deployment. But for now, we'll just take all the defaults, and I'm going to go ahead and say create app. And I'm going to let this run for a while. Let's see. So while that is happening, let's see. So the next thing we need to do is add GitHub action for build, test, and deploy. Now the way GitHub actions work is we can decide to add our action right from our repo here and just select a repo. So this action will restore and build your project and all of that. This action will is for the .NET desktop, and we have other actions that will do other things with different platforms to your code. But I prefer to add my actions from code, right, from manually. And what you are going to do is at the root of your project, you need to add a folder called .github. So if you add a .github folder here, within .github, you need to add another folder called workflows. So I'll add workflows. And if you don't do it like this, GitHub will not find your action. So I will add workflows. And after adding workflows, I want to now add my GitHub action. And for this, I will add a new file. I need to make sure I am adding it to the workflows folder. So I'll add a new file and call it build deploy.yml. So we're using YAML files. Just to confirm, the GitHub folder, the workflows folder, and the build deploy. For this, I am going to copy a sample GitHub action I already wrote down for this. So I'll copy it and I'll paste it here and then run through it. Before I run through it, let's see if our environment is done creating. Not yet. Okay, so not yet. So let's run through this and see. So first of all, I need to name my action. So the name of the file can differ from the name of the action. So for this action, I am naming it build, test, deploy because I want it to do a number of things. If I want a test step here, I can add a test step. I will just remove the test because I am not adding a test step here. I don't have any tests in this project. So the name is build, deploy. And then I have this on key. So on says, when should I run this action? I am saying run this action when there's a push to these branches. This is an array. So I can say when there's a push to master, dev, staging, I want you to run this action. And I can say if there's a pull request to master, dev, staging, I want you to run this action. So what this can help you do is that immediately someone opens a pull request to master, you can run a GitHub action to test that code and do some things against it before even having to review that pull request. I'm going to return this to master because I'm working with just one branch here. So say master, and so I create a job. You can create multiple jobs. For this I'm creating just one job. So a job is what should happen. I can specify the platform I want this code to run on. So you can specify that you want this code to run on Windows or on Mac or on Linux. For this, I am running this code on Linux. And because you're running this code on Linux, you actually have the full functionality of the Linux command line tools at your disposal. GitHub Actions has some preset actions that you can use, which I am using here. So I'm going to take this action/checkout version 2 and I'm going to Google it so we see what it is. So let's look at what Google has to say. So checkout version 2, this action checks out your repository on the GitHub workspace so your workflow can access it. So what this does, what this uses does is it gets my code from my repo into this virtual machine environment so I can now interact with it. Think of it as checking out your code into a machine so you can now interact with it. So the entire code here, this is what it does. I could do this manually by maybe writing codes to pull from the repo and all of that, but GitHub already created some actions we can use for this kind of task. So I will use, so all I have to say is uses this and it just pulls in that code. And then I say setup.net, and what this does is it installs .NET Core and all of that on this machine for us automatically, and I can tell it with version I want to install. I am saying I want to install .NET version 5.0.x, whichever is the latest. And that's awesome, that's really awesome. And so suddenly I have my entire environment set up to run and build a .NET application. Now I need to tell it which CS Proj or SLN to build if I'm using an SLN. And I will simply change this. So this is from a project I used before. So I will simply change this to sample.vvm app. So that is the name of my CS Proj, sample.vvm app. I hope I'm not making a mistake. And so I'm saying, hey, just restore dependencies. So this will restore the dependencies. Now I am saying build this project. So I'm saying go in and build this project. After building, I will publish this to a folder. So I'm publishing a release version of this folder to web. And remember that thing I told you about having the full functionality of Linux? I am using the Linux zip tool here. So here I'm saying, hey, take this web folder and zip it into a web.zip. Now, Elastic Beanstalk requires that for each deployment you make, it needs a unique version number. So you can decide how you want to do versioning, but for this, I am using another GitHub action. Remember how for this GitHub action has functionality that lets you copy out your code. For this GitHub actions allows you to get the current date and time in this format. And what I am doing here is to use the current date and time, the time when this deployment is running, as my version number that I push to Elastic Beanstalk. Great, so I use this to get a version number. And then there's another action that lets us deploy to Elastic Beanstalk. Let's take a look at it. I'll go to Google once again and just paste this in. Let's look at this. So this action allows us to deploy to Elastic Beanstalk, and it tells us some parameters we need to supply. We need to supply an access key, which gives us access to the AWS repo, access key ID and access key. We need to supply an application name and an environment name, and we need to supply a version label. Let us come back to our action. So remember, the reason I got this version number is so I could use it here. So I'm saying, hey, go to the steps. I named this ID version. So we are running all the steps. So go to the steps and then this version. And then in that version is going to have some outputs. Check in the outputs and check the time part of it and use that time as the version label for our action. And I need to tell it what to deploy. Remember this zipped folder? So we published our application into this folder and zipped it. Now I am saying take this zip package and send it to Elastic Beanstalk, and Elastic Beanstalk knows exactly what to do with it. But what is this application and environment name? Let us look at our create environment. So create environment is starting. Okay, successfully launched environment. So I think our environment is fine now. Health is okay. I'm going to click on this link to take us to the environment, and we see we now have an application running in the cloud. I'm going to come back here and I want this application details. So this is the application name. I'm going to copy the application name and bring it here. So application name and environment name. So this is the environment name up here. I'll copy this environment name and put it here. And at this point, I think everything looks good. We're ready to push this to GitHub. So now we'll also push this to master. What we expect to happen is that all of this is going to run and our code is going to show up here. So this should become a .vvm application. Let's try that out and see. So I'm going to say git status. And obviously we added just the .github folder. So git add dot, once again, git commit m, added GitHub action, get status. Okay, now I can push to master, git push, origin master. And immediately this push happens, I will come to my actions, come back to my actions, and now I have an action running. If I click here, I will go ahead and open this. Let's refresh this. Now I will open this. It's setting up a job now. So it has checked out my code. So if you see, it's checking out the code. It's setting up .NET. It's restoring dependencies. So .NET restore and all of that. So there's some warnings here. .NET Core 3.0 is out of support. Now it's building, publish, and look at the zip step. It's adding all those things. Okay, so it says we had an error here when we're deploying. So no application named sample.vvm app found. Okay, that's weird. Let's go back to our application. All right, let's look at this appsample.vvm app. Let's see, do I have a typo? Sample application name sample.vvm app, environment name sample.vvm env. That is weird. We have sample.vvm app. I think I am going to have to need a second to okay, let's once again just check that application sample.vvm app environment sample. That is really weird. This is weird, so I am just going to go ahead and do another build and see if there's going to be a change, because there's no typo. Application, environment, this is all good actually. So I'll just say we run all jobs. And let's see if we get the same error. Okay, so we're setting up .NET. Sample.vvm app. That looks okay. We have the same error. That's really weird. Let's just delete our application and recreate it. So I'm going to say delete application. Sample.vvm app, delete, and I will go ahead and create a new application. For this, I will name this sample.vvm app2. And I will say create. Let's delete this. Do a refresh here, so we see what is the state of this application. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this too. Okay, this has already been deleted. But let's do this from the top. So create a new environment, a web server environment. Next. Application name, sample.vvm app. Let's say sample.vvm application. So sample.vvm application. For the environment, this time I will set my environment name myself. So sample.vvm application env. I'm going to use this as the domain name too. So I want to set my domain name myself now. Sample.vvm application env. US East 1. Aha, I see the problem now. So I was deploying it to the wrong region. It's a silly mistake. This is a mistake I make all the time. So this should be, the region should be US East 1 because this resource does not exist in that region I was deploying it to. That's a silly mistake. I'm going to check the availability. This is available. The platform is going to be .NET Core on Linux. I'm going to use a sample application, and this is going to take a minute to create. So just in case you run into this issue with me, this is a problem. I forgot to change the region from US West to US East because this is not Virginia, and not Virginia is US East 1. I was using US West 1, which is North Carolina. So you should take note of that. I think you need to take note of this in Azure too. So let us give it a few minutes to run. And while this is happening, we can just look at the structure of a GitHub action. Or I'm going to update this parameter so I don't forget again. So this is my environment name. I'll copy this, update my environment name. Application name, I think application name is the same thing without the env. Great, now all we have to do is wait for this to finish. So while we're waiting for that, like I was saying before, if you're looking for good resources to basically play around with .vvm, you can find all of that here. And please definitely follow us. We have a Twitter too, and our Facebook. We're always putting content there. And I encourage you to join our community meetup. So during our community meetups, we talk about everything technology, not just .vvm and all of that. So I encourage you to join our community meetups from time to time. Let's see if we're done creating. Okay, so we're close. So environment health has changed from transition to pending. We're just going to give this a minute to finish. Let's do a refresh here and see. Refresh. And you see it's creating some auto-scaling some auto-scaling infrastructure here, right? So even whenever your environment goes down, it's so behind Elastic Beanstalk is an EC2 instance, and anytime AWS notices that your load is increasing, it simply creates more EC2 instances and adds it and basically load balances it for you. So this is a super convenient way to just get up a simple website. So you see it says created load balancer listener and instant deployment completed successful. Let's go to environments now, and this is it, still pending. Okay, successfully launched environment. So why did you? And now we have an OK message here. This is terminated. So I'm going to see if we can. So we have the sample application here. I'll double check my application name, sample.vvm application, sample.vvm application environment. And now I will just double check sample.vvm application, sample.vvm application env. Region is US East 1. Let's double check. So North Virginia is US East 1. Good. We're going to do a commit. Git status, git add dot, git commit updated environment parameters, git status, and now we can push it to master, push origin master, and hopefully if we pray to the God of deploys, this time it will go without any issues. So we have this new push running. Running. Let's see. Okay, so it says starting deployment and it looks like it's fine right now. It says environment update is starting and this is a good sign. We just have to wait for it to finish. You know what, I'll just go check it because I'm impatient. So, so this is the one we deleted. Let's see if we have a new instance here already. Not yet. It's still running. environment is still getting updated, and even though we haven't reported success here, so it says updating health is green, but we see that our application has changed to hello from .vvm, so our update was successful. While I'm still waiting for this to report a success, I will just go ahead and change something here very quickly. So I will change something from our views. You know what, let's change it from the view model. Instead of hello from .vvm, I will say hello from .vvm virtual conference. And now we see this has reported a success. Awesome. But let's just update this and push. So I can see git status, git add .git commit updated hello message, git push origin master, and this time we now have that convenience of each time we push to a specific branch, it goes straight into our into the cloud. And this is just a really simple example. If you would like to learn how to do this with databases, so basically, what if you have migrations to run, or you have some complex work to do, or certificates to manage, or all of those things, you can automate all of those processes with GitHub Actions, and that is kind of the power of GitHub Actions. So if you would like to learn all of those things, and I encourage you to join our community calls, because we talk about those things there. Awesome, so let's add a step. So this is test, we already tested it and it works. So let's add step 9, questions. And I will say ask me questions and I will answer if I can. Thank you for attending this session, and I'm really glad to have you. Let's see if this has updated, and we have hello from .vvm virtual conference. Thank you.
Hey friends, welcome to the last session of DotVVM virtual conference. I hope that you enjoyed sessions on today and yesterday, and so let's see what's planned for the next version of DotVVM. And after that, of course, if you have any questions, just let us know in the chat here in the live stream, or on our Gitter chat. You will find the links on our website and on GitHub, because we are very interested in your feedback, what you think about .vvm, what features you would appreciate in the framework, or if you have any suggestions or questions, we will be very happy to help and talk with you, because we are very interested in knowing how the users are actually using .vvm and what you are building. Okay, so let's see what plans we have for the next major release, .vvm 4.0. We always try to have some kind of main theme for each major version. So for the version 4, the topic is make it easier to create custom controls. Because .vvm supported creating your own controls from the first versions, but in the version 2 or 3 we didn't change much about this process, and looking back it's not very straightforward. There is a quite steep learning curve, so if you want to build your own controls in .vvm, it's possible, but the framework doesn't help you much with this, and you need to know a lot about how .vvm works internally. So that's why we want to change this, because we feel that this is starting to be a limitation for many users of .vvm, and if we can make it more straightforward, more intuitive, more easy, then I think it would be very useful, not only to people who are just writing these controls, but also to other team members who are just using the controls, because they will probably have more controls to use, and it should improve the development speed. So what's the current situation in the framework? We have two types of controls. First is markup controls, which is the file with an extension dot control, and basically it's a piece of dot HTML markup. You can define your own properties in the markup, and then you can use this markup control on any place in your application. This is great for application-specific markup controls, because typically you can reuse these markup controls in one project, in one app, but I cannot imagine, or it's hard to imagine such universal markup control that would be where it would be possible to use it in any app you might know, you might have, because typically these controls are using CSS styles, which are also part of the concrete application. So this is not great for the very universal controls which you can use anywhere, but it's great if you need to reuse parts of markup in one application. The next type of controls is the code-only controls, and basically it's just a C# class which inherits from .vvm control, and it can define properties, it can hook up to the control lifecycle, so you can do things in init, load, pre-render methods, and it can also override its own rendering, so you can render something completely different than the control tree which is inside of your controls. This is very powerful, however it's also very low level, because you can do anything, but if you want to build some more complex control, you need to know a lot of things. And if you go to .vvm framework GitHub repository and look on some controls, how they are written, you will see that even the most basic controls like text box are pretty complicated actually. Yeah. And the truth is that this is not a problem for framework authors like us, because we know how this works and what should the control does. But for people who don't have any knowledge about how .vvm works internally, this is very difficult. Yeah. And also what bothers me too is how .vvm properties are declared. They are not just regular properties with getSet and auto-generated bodies, but you need to use the code snippet .prop tab, and it will generate this crazy bunch of code. It's similar like dependency properties in WPF. The reason for this is that you need to, the property needs to support the raw value and also the data binding expression. So it's not that easy, just a string property, because it won't be possible to hide a binding expression inside it. But we still are thinking about ways how to make the declaration of these properties easier, or maybe auto-generated from something else, so you don't need to type so much code and maintain, because also if you look at some more complex controls, you have hundreds of lines of these .vvm properties. So we have some ideas how to make markup controls more easier, more convenient. There are a couple of things we can do to make it easier, so you don't need to create the code behind class together with the markup control. Because if you were just reusing piece of markup, you can just have the dot control file, and you don't need to have the C# code behind class attached to this file, that the base type directive it is. Yeah, but if you want, for example, to use a CSS class on this on this entire markup control, then you need to use the code behind class and add attributes or CSS classes. So whenever you use the markup control, it will also have the correct CSS class. And we were thinking about reusing the wrapper tag directive, which is present. Yeah, so you can say, okay, this my control, the wrapper tag for this my control is div. But we are thinking about adding a support for this. You can say, okay, it will be a div, but set the role attribute to panel, and also this dot means it's a CSS class, it's the CSS selector syntax. So also it means that, okay, and add CSS class styled panel to this control. So you won't need to create the C# code behind class, because wherever you use this markup control, it will be a div with this attribute and with this CSS class. So this is an idea we had. We had an issue on GitHub, and probably we will implement it because it looks quite nice to us. Yeah, but it's still in consideration. Then we were thinking about adding an option to declare .vvm properties as directives in the markup file. So also, if you want to just create a markup control with few properties you need to set from outside, then you also, right now, you need to create the C# code behind file and declare these .vvm properties. And for example, we could create a property directive, which would say, okay, we will have a title property. It can be a value or a binding of string. Yeah, this is a new type we are already supporting in one of the pull requests, and we can reuse it here, because if it's just string, it means that it doesn't support data binding. If it's this value or binding string, it means it supports either string value or a data binding. And also we have a value binding of string, which means that, okay, it can be a binding, but you cannot write just title equals something. Yeah, it has to be a binding. Yeah, so based on this type, we would be able to distinguish if a binding is supported or not. And then you can specify a default value. Maybe there will be some option to also specify other things, like if this property is required, because it's also quite important for us. And other things like maybe because if it's the item template, it means that we will have to set also some markup options to that .vvm parser should look for this property not as an attribute but in the body of this control. So it's not, it's still in our head. We are still thinking about how to approach this the best, but we want to just remove a lot of places where you need to create a code behind class. Also, if you want to create a markup control but host a template inside, then also it's not very easy to do. You have to create some element with an ID, and then in the code behind file you need to look for this element and instantiate the template inside. And we want to make it easier, so we were thinking about some kind of template host control where you could just bind the template and the template could be introduced by this add property. So you would be able to create a markup control with templates without the code behind class, and it should be pretty easy to do. However, there are also some internal issues we have right now with passing templates inside markup controls, because it's basically there is a lot of things that DotVVM needs to do internally to make sure the template will work in a different scope, in a different markup file, because you can still, if you are using the template in the page, you can use types that are related to import directives in the page, not related to the markup, to the import directives in the markup control file. So it's complicated, and it gets even more complicated when you are using recursion. So if you are recursively using markup control inside its own instance, if you would be rendering some tree structures or something like that, you will meet this situation, and it gets more and more complicated. So we are currently considering how to implement this, because it's not very easy, and it's complicated because we want the templates to be type safe, and the template needs to know in which data context it will be used. So you would have IntelliSense, and we would have strong typing and syntax checking and all those nice things. But these are just things we are thinking about in terms of markup controls. For code-only controls, we have found that a lot of users are writing their own code-only controls, and the most frequent scenario is that you just want to compose a control from existing ones. So it's not creating your own component from scratch. Not many people are writing actually their own grid view. They are pretty fine with the one which is in a .vvm framework, and you can just extend it. But typically you want to create some control which composes several controls together, but it needs to be more universal, so it cannot be done in a markup control, because the structure of the control can depend on values of some parameters. And that's that's why we have introduced the concept of composite control, which is defined as just a C# class, and the only requirement you have is to provide a static method called getContents, and you don't need to declare the .vvm properties like you would normally do. You can do it in the composite control, but you don't have to, because if you pass any parameters to the getContents method, it will create these .vvm properties for you. So you will be able to just specify 5 attributes, and these will be converted to .vvm properties, so you can just use them. And we have that's where we are also using the new type value or binding. So if the value is bindable, but it can be also provided at a compile time, you can use this new type. You can specify default values and other things, and it should just work. And we are also working on a new Fluent API, which will help you to just build the control tree. So for example, I can return a new HTML generic control, Fluent Progress, and set the value attribute to the value or binding. And this extension method will do the rest. If the value is hard-coded, then it will just set the value. If it's the binding, it will translate it to the blah 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 expression and use it here. So we are just fine-tuning these extension methods to make sure that all scenarios you would probably need will be covered by these methods, and it would help us to implement this functionality. So you are you just need to provide a static method that returns the tree of the controls you want to be rendered, and that's it. And of course, because this is just an expression, you can use ifs, you can use for loops, you can use link, you can use anything. So you can basically generate the control tree. This makes it very powerful. It's more powerful than markup controls, where the markup is basically static. You cannot change the structure you can only substitute some values. Yeah? Here you can also manipulate with the structure, so you can generate any structure of components, and this is really powerful. And with this syntax, it will be much easier to define .vvm properties. This is already implemented in a pull request, which is called easier way to write controls. If you look at our GitHub repo, you can see it there. You can even try it if you use the .vvm repo as a submodule. And we are just finishing and reviewing if everything is nice to and easy to use. And once we are finished, we will merge it, and we will of course publish a preview, because we want to get feedback on this feature as soon as possible. So basically you need to inherit from a composite control, which is a new type, and implement a static method called getContents, and it will emit .vvm properties from the arguments of this method. And you can also go to this link to a sample repo where I have some experiments with this functionality. It's also using Fluent UI, because this method is great for building wrappers over either .vvm controls or HTML elements. Yeah, even this sample is just a wrapper over Fluent Progress. Yeah, so I'm creating a statically typed .vvm component which will know about the value property. It will know the type of the attribute, it will know if it supports a binding or not, and it just renders some HTML. And then the Fluent UI scripts will make it look like a Fluent UI progress bar. So this is very, very easy and simple way to write wrappers over existing controls. So let's look at our demo. This project I will be showing, it's not publicly available yet, but we are working on it, and we are still deciding if it's a good idea or not, and also we are waiting until the Fluent UI team adds the missing components, and we are not sure if we will publish this as open source or as a paid product. We are still thinking about it, because it would be similar to Bootstrap for .vvm. It would simplify the usage of Fluent UI, but it's just wrappers for .vvm. It doesn't add value to the Fluent UI itself. Same as Bootstrap for .vvm. It's just syntax sugar for .vvm, but still underneath there is still just the open source Bootstrap. Yeah, so the principles behind this Fluent UI library will be very similar. Okay, so let's look at the demo. You have seen the syntax that will be probably available. So that's what we are trying to achieve, because .vvm can provide IntelliSense for these controls. It can provide IntelliSense here for data bindings. It can tell you that you need to only use these elements inside. So this strongly typed approach is very beneficial, because it helps you to catch a lot of errors before you even try to run the app. And if you look how these wrappers are actually built, so I can open the tabs class, and it's kind simple. It's just one screen to build a wrapper like this. So I have the tabs control, which derives from Fluent UI composite control. This is just my base class. The only thing it adds is that it's the composite control, but it adds the Fluent UI script. It makes sure that this script will be included in the page, otherwise the control wouldn't work, because it would be missing the script. So that's the only reason why we have the Fluent UI composite control. And here you can see the control needs a list of tab elements, and if it's a list of some .vvm controls, the .vvm parser knows that this will be inside the element. And also we have this attribute telling it that if it finds any content inside the Fluent tabs control, it will be treated as the items property. Yeah, so all elements you will put inside will go to the items property, and if it's not compatible with this type, you will get a compile time error. Yeah, so it's great. It will provide the validation. There is an active indicator property with the default value true. We probably will change this syntax, so you will be able to use just bool active indicator equals true. Right now it's not implemented, but we think we will change this. Maybe we will support both syntax, but of course this one is much more practical. The same is with active ID, but the active ID can be a binding, so there is value or binding. Because I want to bind to this, I want to be able to detect on which tab the user actually is in my view model. And orientation equals horizontal, because the tabs can also be vertical, so there are actually two options. And this is also quite nice, because in .NET we are using these values, but I have created an attribute with HTML name where in HTML the value can look differently. And this also auto-generates some code, so in the markup you will use the enum name from C#, but it will be converted to this HTML name that will be used on the client side. And we need to do two things. We need to prepare the tab headers, so I will take the items collection and I will create an HTML generic control Fluent tab and set the inner text to this thing. I'm not sure why we are using this syntax. Yeah, we can do it. We can do it like this. I'm not sure. Maybe it's some refactoring magic. But I'm using the Fluent tab and with property inner text and get value raw. Yeah, so I'm just taking the no matter if it's value or binding, I'm just taking the value and setting it to the inner text. And then I'm returning a Fluent tabs element, and with this attribute, with this active ID bind attribute and the orientation, and this I'm using as a children, and also this, because the Fluent tabs element is designed like that you inside you put either both tab headers and the tab contents inside the Fluent tabs. So that's why I'm using the tab headers and items as children. Yeah, and this is fine because it will render exactly what I need. And I can go to the tab element, which is inside, and also it's a Fluent UI composite control. I have a header text which is defined using this way because I need to specify some things that are not available using the other way, but we will probably change this, so also this property could be specified like that. But right now I need to read its value from here and to set it to the header text. So that's why I need to have it as a proper .vvm property. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to use this name. Yeah. So that's the reason why I'm doing this right now. But still, the tab itself is pretty easy because it has some ID, it has some text, it can be bindable, or it has a list of controls which can be inside. So either you are using the text property or you are using the content. And I'm returning a new Fluent tab panel with this ID and with this text or content. This is my helper method, which will detect if the user has specified the text property or if the user has specified content. You cannot specify both because .vvm wouldn't know which one you actually want to use. There will be a conflict, so you can use one or the other. Yeah, so this, or if none of them is set, I will just do nothing. It will be just an empty tab. Yeah. So this is how the wrappers are actually written. Most of them are very simple. They get just about 30-40 lines of code. So it's very convenient. And I think also if you look at the class, it's pretty intuitive, if you want to see what it actually does. So we are still working on some ways to clean up the syntax. I don't like these default value attributes much. So this is what we will be fine-tuning, so it's even easier, but I still think that this is a great improvement, and hopefully it will be useful even if you want to create components from other ones. What's quite interesting is the select, because you can do quite complex things with this mechanism. For example, the select, which is the drop-down list, so it needs a data source, which is and it must be a binding, so I'm requiring it has to be I-value binding of any object, so this is a data source. And you have selected value, which also must be a binding, and some things about how it will look like. This is pretty simple. And then you need to specify which property of these objects will be treated as a text and which will be treated as a value. So this is the item text binding, item value binding. If you know the default combo box control in .vvm framework, we are using the exactly same concept. You give it a collection of objects, and then you say, okay, display this property, which is item text binding, and display this property, which is value binding. But you need to change the binding context for these two bindings to a member of this collection. So that's why we have this control property binding data context change and collection element data context change. So it will look to the data source property and infer its type. And then it's a collection, so we need to look inside the collection and what's the type of the individual items. And this is the data context for this data binding. So you can use these attributes. If you have been writing your own controls with data source, you probably have seen these attributes, and you can use the same attributes, same approach here. So it's pretty powerful. It can do a lot of things. And because Fluent Select, as I shown in the first session today, it's just a repeater which renders the Fluent Select tag, and inside it's rendering Fluent option elements for each item in the collection. That's why I can implement it using a repeater. So I'm creating a repeater, setting wrapper tag name to Fluent Select, and creating an item template, which is Fluent option, and I'm setting the value and the text of these options. And that's it. The rest is just a normal ceremony with setting some filled attribute to true or false, setting position to some enum, and selected value is a property, and I need to use this fast.bind binding because it's two-way. So that's why I'm using this with property and fast bind dash value. This is just a replacement. This is a equivalent of fast.bind dash value. So that's it. That's how you can write a wrapper over Fluent UI select control. I really like this approach. So that was easier way to write controls. We have a pull request for this. Most of this functionality is already implemented, so if you want to try it, you can clone .vvm repo as a submodule, and you can reference the .vvm framework ASP.NET Core projects and try it. That reminds me that I wanted to record a video about using .vvm as a submodule, because it can be useful to many people. So watch us on Twitter, and you will see a tweet with the link to this video after I record it. One of the other features we wanted to introduce is more clever grid view datasets, because right now we have the grid view dataset object which supports paging and sorting, but it's not very extensible. If you have different strategy for paging and sorting, you cannot use this object. You have to create your own basically from scratch. Yeah, because the paging is using page index and page size, which is great for SQL or relational databases. But if you are using other database engines, for example Cosmos DB or any other document databases, some of them don't have a concept of page index. Instead, they are using things like a continuation token. So you get a first page of records, and then you get some magic strings, which is called continuation token. And if you provide this token, you will get the next page of records. And it can contain the token for the previous page and for the next page. So if you want to create a token-based paging, this dataset cannot help you very much. Also, it's same things if with the sorting, because 99% of users just need to sort by one column. That's why we are just have the sort expression and sort descending property. But if you want to allow the users to sort by multiple columns, also it's not possible right now. And if you want a filtering support, you can use the business spec dataset, which derives from the grid view dataset. But if you also derived from the grid view dataset in the framework, you cannot derive from two classes in C#. So it's very difficult to combine the features together. So what we are also, the dataset relies on commands. So if you are using command binding, it's perfect, it will work. But if you want to load it using static command, it is possible, but it's not very easy and straightforward to do. And also the grid view and data pager controls, they generate buttons for sorting and paging, and these buttons also have command bindings baked inside. So if you want to create paging that will work with static commands, you basically need to write your own data pager. Yeah. So this is pretty inconvenient, and we want to extend this to so the static commands can be used with the same comfort as commands. So we have a few suggestions. It's also in an issue on GitHub. So if you want to give us feedback on it, please let us know. We will be very happy, because we are still considering many things, and it always an external opinion will really help us in the decision process. So first we were thinking about a concept of some kind of dataset loader, because the dataset is a presentation layer concern. It should define the data you want to display, and it's just a declaration that I am displaying this data with this settings of sorting, this settings of paging, and this filter. So basically that's something like the request. It's something like a query definition or something like that. And it shouldn't contain logic on how to load this information. This should be somewhere else. So the dataset should tell the user what you want to display, and it should be able to control what you want to be displayed. And dataset loader should tell how to get this data based on the definition in the grid view dataset. And here you would be able to tell, okay, I want to use commands, so I will post the view model on the server and call load from queryable or something like that. Or I want to bind it from the REST API. I want to use static command. I want to get the data from JS module. Yeah, so that's very yeah, you can choose what's the way of loading these data sets. So if you want to, if this is a control we would like to provide, so it would be extensible and you could explicitly define how you want to get the data. The other problem is that, as I said, grid view and data pager are generating their own controls with command bindings baked in. So if you use data pager, it will render the buttons for numbers for all pages, but these buttons have the command binding inside. If you want to customize how these buttons look like and how the data bindings in these buttons work, you need to write your own control. So we are thinking about some kind of template provider mechanism that you could, on the application or on the page level, you could say, okay, in data pager I want the buttons to look like this and have a data binding that would look like this. So if you want to load by static command, you would be able to do that. And the last thing is that we want to make the grid view dataset to be generic. So there will be a class generic grid view dataset, which will have a lot of generic parameters, and you will be able to specify your custom sorting options, custom paging option, custom filtering options. So if you want to create a token-based paging or multi-criteria sorting, you would be able to provide the dataset with a concrete type which represents all settings for sorting, all settings for paging, and you would be able to build your own grid view dataset. So that's what's on our plan. And the last area we want to improve, and we have already started working on this, is the validation, because also it works well for commands, but it doesn't work for static commands really nice. It's not difficult to, it's not very difficult to make it work for static commands if you know how .vvm works, because you can just use some kind of action filter which would get the model state, random view model validation, or not the view model, the arguments validation, and return the validation errors to the client. But still we want to make it work by default. So we are thinking about you could apply validation attributes on arguments of methods called from static command. So you would send the first name and last name to some method, and in the declaration of the method you can say, okay, this is required, this has to be a number, and things like that. And also, if the method, if the validation doesn't pass, the model state would be returned to the client, and the client would also highlight the fields which contain these invalid properties. Also, if you generate your own validation paths, if you are implementing your iValidatable object and your own validation mechanisms, sometimes you need to compose the paths in the view model, like in the event settings .begin date is this property is not correct, and you need to provide .vvm where to find this property in the view model. And currently you had to compose Knockout.js compatible expressions, so there was a lot of the parentheses, and it was difficult when you are using arrays. We want to clean this up, so there will be a better API for specifying these validations errors. And also we are thinking about, and this is also just an idea, we think about a feature called zero.vvm startup, because right now if you are writing a larger application, the .vvm startup file is quite long, because you need to register all the routes, all the controls, all the resources, and things like that. And we were thinking about introducing some convention-based registrations. So if you follow some kind of project structure in the file system, so you would create a folder per page, and view models and views will be in the same folder, and you can also add resources like JavaScript and CSS styles, and these will be included automatically to the page. Then if you follow these conventions, the .vvm startup could be almost empty, because .vvm would just scan the file system and auto-discover all pages, all controls, all scripts, all resources, and things like that. So this is also one of the ideas we are looking at, because currently the .vvm startup is quite long and it's not very convenient to look for some kind of route registration if there is a lot of routes in the application. So that's the plan for .vvm 4.0. Some things will be there for sure, like the easier way to write controls, because it's almost ready. Some things we hope that we will make into this release, like the validation, and of course the grid view dataset improvements would be nice, but we don't want to delay the release of .vvm 4.0 for too long. So if we see that some of these areas is larger than we thought, then we will release .vvm 4.0 without this feature, and postpone this particular feature to .vvm 5. We want to make the major releases more frequent, so you can get more new features and you can get them more quickly. So this is the last slide of the entire conference. If you want to help us, if you like .vvm, if you like to join the team, or at least provide us some feedback, we would be very happy. Post an issue on GitHub, or if you are brave enough, you can just clone the code base and you can send us pull requests with some improvements. Even if you find some tiny little issues in the docs, please send us pull requests. There is the edit button, so if you find a typo or any problem in the documentation, just click on the edit button and send us pull request. It's very easy, and it will help us, because we want the documentation to be as good as possible. And of course, if you can spread the word about .vvm, if you like it, we would be very happy, because the growing community is best for all open source project. we will be happy to talk. If you want to talk with us, you can use this chat, or you can talk to us on Gitter. And of course, follow us on our social media, especially Twitter and YouTube, because on YouTube we are publishing a lot of videos, and on Twitter we are posting information about new releases and all the events we are doing. And we have a monthly meetup, so if you are also interested in getting know about the .vvm community and hearing regular information about what we are planning, what we are working on, join also our meetups. It's a great source of information, and of course you can ask any questions and we will be happy to talk with you. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed the entire conference. So have a nice rest of the day. Bye.